Welcome to the January 26th 1 Year Chronological Reading Insights video. We're going to be covering chapter 26 through 29 of Job. We'll start off in chapter 26. Job is answering back to Bildad here. And so he gives an answer back to Bildad. And basically, chapter 26, the kind of theme is wisdom. And first, you kind of see in verses 1 through 4, you kind of see him offering kind of this sarcasm to Bildad, for a sarcasm to Bildad for his lack of true wisdom. Job answered and said, of course this could apply to his friends as well, how you have helped him who has no power. Basically, Job's like, that's me. Oh, how you've helped him. This is sarcasm. How you have saved the arm that has no strength, because that's Job. He has no strength. There's some sarcasm here, right? How you have counseled him who has no wisdom, and plentifully declared sound knowledge. Do you catch it? This speaks the language of so many people. With whose help have you uttered words, and whose breath has come out from you? He's saying like, whose breath, like you claim it's from God, whose breath? He's just basically saying, it's another sarcasm, basically, like you didn't get. Ooh, that's ugly. You didn't get this from God. So what Bildad had just said to him, of course you see in chapter 25, Bildad has like 6 verses. He just kind of gives up and gets tired. So some sarcasm he speaks towards answering Bildad about the wisdom of God, his lack of true wisdom. And then you'll see in verses 5, basically in verses 5 through 14, Job speaks towards Bildad, and I'd say by extension the other friends, about the wisdom of the sovereign God over creation's order. So he basically was sarcastic about, Bildad's wisdom. And he talks about the wisdom that only God has, the sovereign God has, in verses 5 through 14 as he kind of ends off the chapter. We'll look in verse 5 through 6. He talks about God's wisdom over basically everything under the earth. Kind of God's wisdom of under land level, where he says, the dead tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. So basically he's saying anything under land level, nothing escapes the wisdom of the sovereign God over creation's order. It goes further than your wisdom goes, Bildad. It goes further than anybody's wisdom. Verse 7 through 10, he kind of now talks about, all the way to 10, he talks about creation's order, the sovereign God, and how he is over creation's order. Very important that we keep continuing to recognize the Lord as a creator. When you start doing that, you strip him of his sovereignty. Verse 7, he stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. So stretching out the north is kind of talking about the expanse of the sky, the expanse of the heavens. In kind of ancient kind of talk, the north oftentimes was spoken of like this is a place where the gods dwell. So he's like, from the highest point, he stretches out the heavens. He hangs the earth on nothing. Of course, one wonders, how would Job know the kind of orbiting solar system that kind of idea that there's no like perch that earth is sitting on. It just shows you the inspiration of God. It says he binds up the waters in his thick clouds, which means like God controls the waters above, and the cloud is not split open under them. So God is controlling all of creation's order. He's controlling the weather. He's controlling the clouds. He's controlling rain. He covers the face of the full moon, and he spreads over it his clouds, like when you can't see the moon. Okay? So he's talking about this sovereign God is over everything underneath the land, but he's also over everything above. He's over all of creation's order. He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. Most commentators would say he's just basically talking about kind of the land and sea divisions here. That God has said this is how far the sea can go. This is where the land is. So we see that he's talking about the sovereign Lord, the wisdom of the sovereign God over all creation's order, everything underneath, verse 5 and 6, everything in the created order above, verses 7 through 10. And then we look in verse 13 through 14. Sometimes he basically really starting in verse 11 through 13. Sometimes he shakes creation's order. And here, sometimes he shakes creation's order to control evil. This is how wise the sovereign hand of the Lord is. He says, the pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. The pillars of heaven tremble. This would be denoting some bad things happening. By his power, he stilled the sea. He's describing how God shakes creation's order right here, but yet he's the one that's in control of it. So in the end, that he can control evil. By his power, he stilled the sea, although the pillars of heaven tremble, and we've got basically a shaking. In the end, his power is what will still the sea, what will bring, peace and order and calm again. His understanding, by his understanding, he shattered Rahab. Rahab is talking about, there was this kind of ancient story about this dragon Rahab that basically has been fought by God. And so he's just basically grabbing a folklore story tell in there that basically this Lord is more powerful than the sea creature Rahab. He controls even that. Also, Rahab is oftentimes denoted as a serpent, which kind of denotes evilness, representing evil. By his wind, the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. Who's the fleeing serpent? We would be referring back to Rahab, this fleeing serpent. Of course, what idea do we have that God controls even evil? We know this overall in the scriptures. He shakes creation's orders, so in the end, his glory could be shown as he controls evil. He allows Satan to shake the order of Job's life, even possibly shake some of creation order, and that you kind of saw you saw the wind and you saw the lightning in Job chapter 1 and 2, and some wonder, was that God or was that Satan? There's a lot of debate, but in the end, you see that in the end, if God allows anything to be shaken, or any shaking of creation's order does, it comes from his hand, and he is sovereign and control over it, and he does it so that he can control evil, like Satan is a pawn in God's hand. He's been a pawn this whole entire time. Verse 14, I think is a beautiful verse. He says, talking about the wisdom of the sovereign God who's over all creation. He's over everything above and below, and even when he shakes creation's order so that he can control evil and discipline it, it says this: behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways. Wow. Love this. These are but the outskirts. This is just a small piece of his wisdom, Bildad. Just a small piece. There's so much more. And how small a whisper do we hear of him? So he's like, this is just a small piece of his sovereignty. You don't know that much, Bildad. Neither do I. but the thunder of his power, who can understand? But the thunder of his power, who can understand? So he just basically says, this God, he is sovereign. And in that he is big and we are small, and his wisdom is big and ours is small. Bildad, yours is small. You think you figured out, God, you've been consulting me. These are but the outskirts. Everything that I've just described to you, how he controls all of creation, how he controls even shakes creation to control evil. Like all that he oversees is just the outskirts of his ways. Okay, we only know a whisper of him, which Job's just once again trying to get back, to his friends, like basically like, you're wrong, and everything you've told me about why this calamity has come on me, you're wrong. Let me tell you about the God who is far above, who's sovereign over this. Like when a person suffers innocently, we commit ourselves to the sovereign God. We commit ourselves to the character of God. This helps us to actually to have hope in the midst of trying times in our life. Now, you come to verse 28, chapter 28 in Job. Job now is kind of pivoted from speaking back to, chapter 27. In chapter 26, he was speaking to Bildad, and now he speaks to all of his friends. And now he's kind of just doing like a sermon almost, like a monologue here. He's speaking to all of his friends right here, all of his accusers. What's interesting when you read, Revelation 12:10, one of the things that Satan does is he is an accuser of the brethren, right? He's an accuser of brethren, of the brothers, of Christians. And really, that's Job's friends. That's Job's friends. They were this. They were accusers of the brethren. They were accusing Job of something that wasn't true. And by the way, this is something we have to be careful of. I think, in all the years of ministry I've been in, I have seen Christians become accusers of the brethren, where they will think evil things about each other that actually aren't true. That's why we don't gossip. And then, by the way, also don't be surprised when those outside the Christian community think things that aren't true, accusers of the brethren. So one of the ways we actually exemplify the character of Satan is when we are falsely accusing the brothers. Bringing accusations. That's what you see in chapter 1 and 2. Although God brings up Job, Satan, brings accusation and says, hey, it's only because you've had your good hand on him. So he's the accuser of the brethren. That's what Job's friends are. Hopefully, Lord willing, that's not us. So he now speaks to his friends in chapter 27. And in the first, what he does here in verse 1 through 6, he boasts in his righteous standing before God to try to answer back his accusers. Then in verse 7 through 10, he boasts about God's righteous judgment of his accusers. Then verse 11 through 23, he warns his accusers of God's judgment. So he's speaking to all of his friends. And first, we see in verses 1 through 6, this idea that he basically he boasts about his right standing before God. Now, I think there's really something good here, because this is a gospel thing to do, to not boast about ourselves, but boast about what Jesus has made us. We are righteous. We're declared, we are justified in God's sight. We can boast in that. We can boast in the work of the cross. We can boast in Jesus. We can't boast about ourselves, brag about ourselves. We can boast in the atoning work of Jesus. So it says this: Job again took up his discourse and said, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter. So He's like, this has been hard. As long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood and my tongue will not utter deceit. He's saying, like, all the things that have happened to me have not happened from anything. I'm innocent of those. Now, this isn't saying Job's innocent, doesn't have original sin, or that the Lord still has some things in Job's process here as he's been lamenting. God is going to correct. But for all that's happened, there was no unrighteousness, and he has not cursed God. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. Which I love is there's no condemnation in Christ. I mean, like everybody else may condemn you, but if Jesus has forgiven you, then you are clean and clear. I hold fast my righteousness, he says. I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for all of my days. So Job is taking a stand, putting in the ground, and saying, no, I've been declared righteous. And, for Christians, we don't go around boasting about anything right we do, but when God has forgiven us, and that's our calling card. When we are declared righteous by him imputing his righteousness to our account, that's our calling card. That's our boast. That's what gives us, makes life worth living. So it's not necessarily bad. Job's just saying, like, I'm not going to lie about this. I'm not going to do it just to smooth things over. And by the way, what a great pointing to Christ all this is. Verse 7, he now boasts about God's righteous judgment of his accuser. So in verses 7 through 10, we see him basically boasting about God's judgment of his accusers. Let my enemy be as the wicked, and let him who rises against me be as the unrighteous. For what is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? So he's like, this is what's going to happen to the accusers, okay? Be warned. Will God hear his cry when distress comes upon him? Will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call upon God at all times? So he's pointing out what's going to happen to the accusers, the judgment coming on the accusers. And then he comes in verses 11 through 23. And he basically warns his accusers. He does more basically warnings to his accusers of God's judgment. I will teach you concerning the hand of God what is with the Almighty. I will not conceal it. I will not lie. Behold, all of you have seen it yourselves. Why then have you become altogether vain? Why have you denied it? Why have you taken pride in your own observations? This is the portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage that oppressors receive from the Almighty. So he's saying, like, there's judgment to come for those who are the accusers of the brethren, for those who have accused falsely. This is what you're doing. He says, if children are multiplied, it is for the sword. He's basically talking on the future punishment coming on the accusers. And his descendants have not enough bread. Now remember, we're also dealing with poetic language, so it's kind of hard to interpret, but you can kind of catch the drift. He's describing the punishment coming on these accusers. Those who survive him, the pestilence buries, and his widows do not weep. Though he heap up silver like dust, though he has lots of money, and a pile up clothing like clay, he may pile it up, but the righteous will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. It's all going to be split up. All of your unrighteousness, it'll be given to someone else. He builds his house like a moth, like a booth that a watchman makes. He goes to bed rich, but he will do so no more. He opens his eyes, and his wealth is gone. Tremors overtake him like a flood, and then not a whirlwind carries him off. A tornado carries him off. The east wind lifts him up, and he is gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls him without pity. He flees from its power in a headlong flight. He runs from this punishment and judgment that's coming as when you're an accuser of the brethren. It claps its hands at him and hisses at him from its place like a snake. So Job is giving them a picture of this is what happens to the accusers. This is the judgment that's coming. He's speaking to all his friends. This is exactly what his friends have been this whole time. So then he transitions to chapter 28, and chapter 28, he's speaking, there's lots of actually disagreement about what's going on here in chapter 28. I think he's still speaking to his friends, and I think he transitions from actually speaking to his friends about what happens to the accusers of the brethren, what happens to people who've done this satanic thing that you've tried to do to me. I'm not going to stop maintaining my righteousness. Just like when Satan tries to accuse us, we go back to Christ. Every time we're taking communion, we're reminding ourselves that the accuser of the brethren is wrong. So we now come to chapter 28. In chapter 28, he switches to a different idea about wisdom, about what true wisdom is. And what you're going to see in this text is in verses 1 through 11, he talks about wisdom, but he talks about this aspect of wisdom that is something that is searched, something that you search for, and it's valuable, right? When I say wisdom, I'm talking about like the wisdom, just like the wisdom of all of creation, the wisdom of kind of like knowing all things, basically, right? He's like, that kind of wisdom to search for is valuable. And then you're going to see in verses 12 through 22, not only is that wisdom valuable, but it's sometimes inaccessible. Then he's going to talk about in verses 23 through 27 that this actual wisdom is something only God has. But what we got to focus on is verse 28, the wisdom of fearing the Lord. So he talks about wisdom. Now, what he's kind of in this chapter just talking about wisdom in general, like it's searched for, like with the wisdom of kind of knowing all things, like his friends declare they know all things. He's kind of talking in that realm about how precious it is and how hard it is to get. Then he kind of takes us to the ultimate wisdom is the fear of the Lord, which once again takes us to the cross. So let's just kind of look at it. Verse 1, he's talking about searching for wisdom. The search for it is valuable. It's a deep and great treasure. It's valuable. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold that they refine. He talks about going deep into the earth to find wisdom. Find it like you're finding precious metals. Iron is taken out of the earth and copper is smelted from the ore. Man puts an end to darkness and searches out to the fullest limit. As far down as he can go deep. He's digging, right? The ore in gloom and deep darkness. He's going, to get valuable treasure, you have to go down deep where it's scary, deep darkness. And if you want, this is what people want is true wisdom. It's like you dig for it. You get, it's worth going after. He opens shafts in a valley away from where anyone lives. They are forgotten by travelers. It's remote. If you're going for this wisdom of how life works, they hang in the air far away from mankind. They swing to and fro. As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by fire. So he's basically saying this wisdom of all the earth, this wisdom of knowing all things, this wisdom of knowing all how God works. It's not like the wisdom that comes from like above land, right? Where you basically can get grain. That's easy to see the wisdom from an earth level. But he's saying like the wisdom that you're wanting to get, it's like you have to go underground, which is tough, which is dangerous. But that's where you get the valuable treasure. Its stones are places of sapphires, and it has dust of gold. That path no bird of prey knows. Like birds that don't know it, they can't oversee it. Birds can overlook grain. The falcon's eye has not seen it. Birds can overlook what's going on at land level, but they can't see underneath the ground. Even the beasts can't. The proud beasts have not trodden it, and the lion has not passed over it. So not even the beasts of the earth, not even the roaming creatures with great senses of smell and sense can get this wisdom. that's only buried, this wisdom that's buried down deep in treasure. Man puts his hand to the flinty rock and overturns mountains by the roots. Like man goes after this wisdom like man goes after treasure. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing. The man goes after it and goes after it. Now he transitions to this thought. So he's just talked about how valuable treasure is down deep and comparing it to wisdom. Now we come to verse 12. Actually, let me finish. He dams up the streams so that they do not trickle, and the thing that is hidden he brings out to light. Once he finds the precious jewels, he brings it up. It's hidden. It's way down deep. And he's comparing this to searching for wisdom. It's great treasure. And he's kind of using mining kind of parallelism here. In verses 12 through 22, he basically is talking about this wisdom. He continues to talk about this wisdom. And when I say wisdom, I'm talking about just kind of a kind of knowing everything, knowing how all things work. He talks about this wisdom being kind of really valuable, but also inaccessible. I mean, hard to get. I mean, you go and you dig for it. Hard to get. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? So, although he's talking about mining terminologies, like you dig and you find great treasure, but you still haven't found that wisdom that you're looking for. Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not in me. So, even though you dig for deep treasure to find wisdom, it's not just there. It's not so earthly. And the sea says it's not in me. So the sea and the deep say it. It cannot be bought for gold. You can't buy this kind of wisdom of all things. And silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir or the precious onyx and sapphire. This wisdom of all the ways of God and how everything works. This wisdom of how everything works. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. It's costly. You can't afford it. The topaz of Ethiopia. So he's saying he's trying to talk about how expensive and valuable it is, but yet it's inaccessible. Like what great wealth it takes. Like no one has this. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal, nor can it value the pure gold. From where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? Like where are you going to get it? This wisdom. It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. So the living don't have this wisdom of all of life. Even down to the depths of abandon and death. Say, we have not heard rumors of it. So it's even saying that in death, that death in basically hell is saying, we don't know. God understands the way to it. So he basically has just been, you see, he's talking like it's hard to find. It's valuable. You dig for it. You like hidden treasure that you bring out, but yet it's hard to find. It's hard to find. And then he transitioned over to verse 23, and he basically says this wisdom verses 23 through 27, he says this wisdom this wisdom is basically it's hard to get except for God, because he is wisdom. God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. Job's saying, like, friends, you think you know it, but God knows it. God's the one that actually knows everything. Verse 25, and when he gave to the wind its weight and a portion to the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and the way for the lightning of thunder. Verse 27, when he saw it and declared it, he established it and searched it out. So he basically says, this wisdom that you're searching for, ultimately, there's there's no way, like we can't get all of God's wisdom. Like we can't understand all of his ways. Just like if you've been in Christianity anytime if you've done any debate between things like we'll use like Calvinism versus Arminianism, and you see the debates or debating about how God's will works. I mean, you see how all that, trying to figure out, you see that it, like we search it out like treasure, but we can't ever just keep grasping it. There's only one that really knows all of his wisdom. But here's the great one in verse 28, right? Here's the thing that if you don't feel like you can catch all of God's ways and all of his wisdom, and this is what Job's telling his friends, and basically he's some commentators would say this is God speaking here, or at least Job is now quoting what God has said. I mean, we haven't heard from God, since since chapter 1 and 2. And it says, he said to man. So it's either, God quoting or Job quoting, but we have something really true. You try to figure out God, you try to figure out all his ways, you try to figure out everything he's doing, even, let alone the Calvinism versus Arminian thing, just about life. Like basically, what are you doing, Lord? Like, what are you doing with my life? Right? What are you doing with my life? Just all these things we try to figure out. We try to mine for it, and we think we found it, but it's really inaccessible, but we know it's valuable. But God knows all things that he's doing from the beginning. And then he says, verse 28, this is what we got to do. When you don't feel like you can figure out, when you try to figure out how the sovereign God works, and then you've basically lost your mind, here's what you do. Behold, this is what God says. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil is understanding. So what is really wise living? Do we have to figure out all of God's ways? No, not absolutely. Here's what we got to do. Fear God and turn away from evil. So what is this saying? Like, to fear God. We need to fear him. When we fear God, when we fear his judgment and wrath, we run to Jesus. Then also fear is this idea of awe and wonder and worship. Then as a disciple, we worship him. And what happens in our life? We turn away from evil. We continually repent of our sinfulness and turn towards God and live life in a way that properly understands life. That's wisdom. The fear of the Lord. To turn away from evil is understanding. So that's actually where we want to kind of camp out. And once again, this points us to the gospel. This points us to the good news. All right, this idea of fear of the Lord. When you fear the Lord, you fear his judgment, and you also worship. There's two sides of fear. You fear him and you trust him. You fear him and you worship him. That's wisdom. It causes you to turn away from evil to escape judgment, and it causes you to turn away from evil so that you can enjoy him as your treasure. So we see ideas of the gospel littered all over this idea. Then we go to chapter 29 of Job. And now Job turns, and he's now speaking to the Lord. Chapter 29, chapter 30 and 31, he'll be speaking to God. First, what he does in chapter 29, what you see is he basically in verses 1 through 6, he's talking to God. So just know in this section, he's now begun. He's talking with God. All right, he's addressing God in this chapter, and verses 1 through 6, he's kind of letting us know this idea. He basically longs for the fellowship he has had with God. He longs for the fellowship he's had with God. He longs for the old days of what life looks like. And then you'll see in verses 7 through basically the rest of the chapter, this idea that he longs for the dignity and stature he had in society that he thought he'd never lose. So let's kind of look at it. In verse 1, Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were that." So now he's speaking to the Lord. "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and his light I walked through darkness, as I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me." He walked. I mean, things were going in his life in such a way that he knew he was close to the Lord. There was no doubt. And my children were all about me. He was experiencing the blessings. His children were around him as God was around him. He had a strong walk with him. Things were going great outside and inwardly. And when my steps were washed with butter, it was just easy for him. I mean, every day was a good day. And the rock poured out for me streams of oil. He was blessed. All these things were happening. He's like, I long for those days. Now you may think like, he just wants all the goodies. But no, actually what you see in verses 1 through 6, he longs for the old days, but really he longs for the old days, not for the goodies. Really, he just longs for God. I mean, that's all he wants is just God. This is what he longs for, what life was like when he was walking close and near to the Lord. It's not like he's not anymore, but this innocent suffering has come on his life. And when we suffer, sometimes we feel like God's not close to us anymore. We long for those times when it seemed like everything was just going right. And this is what he's wanting. Now, what's interesting is he's longing for God, really, ultimately. What he's longing for is eternity. He's longing for glory. When we remember some good days with the Lord, and we're not in those good days right now, then that helps. I mean, ultimately what you're wanting, and if you're wanting God more than the goodies, you're longing for glory. This is what he's doing. He wants glory. He wants the Lord. He wants to be in a glorified body. He wants to enjoy God again. He wants glory. That's a terrible, terrible penmanship here. I'm just going to have to just let that one ride. Verse 7. Now in verse 7 through 25, really the rest of the chapter, verse 7 through 25, he talks about how he basically longs for mostly the fellowship with God in verse 1 through 6, but he longs for the dignity and stature he had in community. He longs for that. He was the richest man of the East, well thought of, wise. How did people think of him? You're about to see in verses 7 through 25, which also lets you know why some of his friends were, the accusations they had against him of how he treated others and the widow and the childless, because of his position in the gate, his position in community. Their assumption was all that he's suffering is because he didn't do right in his kind of political office. But Job defends like, no, I did right and all know it. But the hard part is, even those that he did right to, it's even hard for them to think that because they're going off this karma gospel too. Their system of suffering, their system is you do right, then immediately right happens to you, and you do wrong, immediately wrong. I mean, so it's even hard for them to view him right. Even Job has lost his position and prominence and stature in the community. He longs for that. Now, there's a part that you're like, wow, he just wants to have his position again. That's so prideful of Job. But I would actually say, I mean, yes, there's probably elements of that, but mostly he wants God in verse 1 through 6. But also, I mean, he longs that life would work in community like it worked before. What's he longing for? Still, he's longing for glory, but what glory will be like in the community. He wants it to be like it was in the past. And, I get it. Don't we get it? He says, when I went out of the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood with reverence they used to have for him. Back in the day before all this happened, before chapter 1 and 2 happened, the princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The voice of the nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth. There was such reverence and respect for what Job had to say. And when Job did say something, he had something to say. When the ear heard, it called me blessed. And when the eye saw, it approved. Because I delivered the poor who cried for help and the fatherless who had none to help them. He was delivering the fatherless and the poor. He had the wise words of Solomon. This guy was Solomon before Solomon was Solomon. The blessings of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. Look how he's helping the disadvantaged, the vulnerable. This is what he was doing in the community, and he was loved for it, and he enjoyed it, and he was walking with the Lord before the calamity of 1 and 2. I was a father to the needy, and I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. He's even counteracting the evil. I mean, he misses those days. He's longing for glory. He's longing for the community of what glory was. He's longing for the redemptive community again. Then he thought to himself this would never end, basically, in verse 18 and 19. Basically through here, he thought like it will always be this good. Kind of thought that. Then I thought, he says, I shall die in my nest, in my safe nest with my family, and life going swimmingly. I shall multiply my days as the sand. My roots shall spread out to the waters with the dew of the night on my branches. My glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. He just thought life was always going to be like this. He longs for those days. He thought it'd never end. He says, men listened to me. They waited. They kept silence at my counsel. People wanted to hear what he had to say. After I spoke, they did not speak again. No one felt like they had to add to his words. And my word dropped upon them. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouths as for spring rain. He was trusted, his words, his wisdom. I smiled on them when they had no confidence. In the light of my face, they did not cast down. I chose their way and sat as chief. I live like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners. Job is longing. He's longing for glory. All the manifold wisdom of God that he does. If anything, God taking all this away, the manifold wisdom, it made, all this calamity that happened, it made him want glory. It made him want God. And for that, we praise him. And then one can't help but see a shadow of the Savior in everything you've seen Job. Although Job is not the Savior, he's not perfect, but you see a shadow, and that you see that it's truly, as Job, in his past life was one that brought relief from suffering and joy and pleasure to the community, that is gone for him, but he longs for it because ultimately he's longing for God. And what we are looking for is the greater Job someday, to deliver and to make life as it should be, to lift up our face like Job was able to do pre-chapter 1 and 2 in the gate. So what a beautiful thing. Job's lamenting. You're going to see him lament more in chapter 31, but in 29 he ends. He wants the old days, but what he really wants more than just the old days is he just wants God. And his suffering has made him feel far from God. And it's hard. When you suffer for a long time. When one suffers long, man, that is a very hard time. That is a time to go running and clinging to the Lord. But that is a time when it can really feel like God is far.